this pandemic, I'm hoping, has afforded people an opportunity to do what my father called for in 1967 when he wrote his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Campus and Community, and he spoke about it as well, which is the need for a revolution of values, a reordering of priorities, where people are now at the center and not things and materialism. For me, it's been a time of reassessing and I've tried to follow those important values in my life, but more importantly, to redouble my efforts through the King Center. I serve as the CEO of the King Center organization that my mother founded 2.5 months after my father died, as the official living memorial to the life, work, and legacy of my father. And our efforts to really educate and train people in this nonviolent way of living that, to me, is the only way to create a more just, humane, peaceful, and equitable world.
Well, I can go back because the first speech I ever gave on a national scene, Minneapolis, and her father was in jail in Birmingham, and Constance Baker Motley was his attorney. Connie Motley was scheduled to speak at one of the big, either NAACP or HBCU. But it was the biggest dinner in Minneapolis. $25 a person in 1963. Wow. And then her daddy, Dr. King, was scheduled to speak the next night in Detroit, and he's in jail. And she says, I can't leave him in jail and I can't leave town. I said, well, you want me to call and tell them to find a substitute? They said, no, you go. And I said, so I showed up, and it was actually my first speech. And I'm grateful to Minneapolis because they didn't boo me when I came, which I expected. They listened to me tell the story of what was going on in Birmingham.
One of the elements that I always think about with Mrs. King is that, she was graceful and gracious, but she was also determined and persistent. And what can we do? Because we can tell people they must be different, that they should be different, but how do we get them to be different?
I was sitting in a room with a gentleman who works in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he was talking about how these studies had been done, around, the traditional way of doing equity and inclusion, to having, all of these different trainings, et cetera, and trying to educate people, this kind of cognitive approach. He said, but what we're discovering is that it takes an experience for people to recalibrate. And the reason I said that is, my father said men hate each other, and that men is universal for the women that are listening. And it was the language of the time. But men hate each other because they fear each other. They fear each other because they don't know each other. They don't know each other because they don't communicate with each other. And they don't communicate with each other because they're separate from each other. I really think when we talk about bold action, nonviolence, one of the first principles, nonviolence is a courageous way of life. It's going to take some bold actions and courage to come out of our comfort zones and our silos to really cross some lines and barriers to experience each other.
Every time I turn